Hello, and welcome back to the Venezuela Crisis Dossier. I'm Rufus Brown. The standoff between the U.S. and Nicolás Maduro is no longer theoretical. The military threat is tangible. U.S. forces operating under Operation Southern Spear have carried out attacks that the U.S. alleges targeted drug traffickers, but which Caracas claims resulted in the tragic bombing of Venezuelan fishing boats. This conflict is already lethal. But why all this with Venezuela? This was once a country with a vision of a bright future. The capital, Caracas, was one of the most modern cities in Latin America, built on immense oil wealth. How did a nation with the world's largest oil reserves descend into a crisis characterized by hyperinflation, mass emigration, and now, the brink of war? Tonight, we go inside the Venezuela crisis. We must examine how a nation of such promise became a pariah state and how Maduro seized control, and how this internal collapse became the perfect opportunity for the Trump administration to launch a maximum pressure campaign combining military force, economic warfare, and a legal strategy designed for regime change. The Venezuelan story is one of a tragedy of descent. For decades, Venezuela was defined by its vast oil reserves, which were discovered early and fueled explosive growth. In the 1970s and 80s, money poured into Caracas, creating a prosperous, modern upper and middle class. But this wealth obscured a fundamental problem: a disastrous, total reliance on petroleum. When oil prices inevitably fell, the social contract failed, creating the instability that allowed populism to thrive. This failure laid the groundwork for the rise of Hugo Chávez and the socialist movement known as Chavismo. Maduro's political identity is defined by this movement. Maduro began his career not in politics but as a bus driver and trade union leader in Caracas. His absolute loyalty to Chávez earned him a spot in the inner circle of the Bolivarian Revolution, culminating in powerful roles as foreign minister and then vice president. The key moment came in December 2012 when Chávez, battling cancer, publicly named Maduro as his handpicked successor. Chávez's death in March 2013 launched Maduro into the presidency through a special election. He won with a razor-thin 50.62% of the vote, a margin that was immediately disputed by the opposition. But even more catastrophic than the political dispute was the economic inheritance. Maduro took power just as the global oil price collapsed. Lacking Chávez's charisma and without the constant flow of petrodollars, Maduro's regime began printing money to fund its massive social programs, triggering the hyperinflation that has since destroyed the Venezuelan currency and created the largest modern displacement crisis in the world. The United States' hostility toward Maduro is driven by a two-pronged strategy: a legal pretext for intervention and a deep geopolitical imperative. The legal pretext, narcoterrorism, the official justification for the military buildup, is the fight against narcoterrorists. Under Executive Order 14,157, the Trump administration has designated Maduro's inner circle as the Cartel de las Soles and placed a $50 million bounty on his head. By framing the entire state as a criminal enterprise, Washington creates a legal basis for kinetic military action, like the alleged bombing of fishing vessels that would be difficult to justify under any other diplomatic framework. The U.S. is essentially arguing that it is not invading a sovereign state, but conducting a law enforcement operation against a terrorist organization. The geopolitical imperative. But the conflict is fundamentally about global influence and control over one of the world's most strategic oil reserves. Maduro's political survival depends on a powerful network of rivals to the U.S., Russia. Despite Foreign Minister Lavrov stating Russia will not send troops, their commitment is clear. Russia and Venezuela have recently signed 42 new bilateral agreements across energy, mining, and military technology, cementing Moscow as Caracas's crucial credit lifeline and strategic partner. China. Beijing is the largest buyer of Venezuelan crude oil, soaking up shipments as debt repayment. This trade directly funds the Maduro regime and helps it bypass U.S. sanctions. The new energy war. The U.S. strategy is aimed at more than regime change. It's about control. By threatening the supply chain, the U.S. aims to choke the flow of heavy crude to its rivals, tightening the global market and exposing the billions in oil-backed loans owed to Beijing. The Trump administration views Venezuela not as a humanitarian issue, but as a hostile proxy state controlled by its most aggressive geopolitical rivals. This confluence of motives leads directly to the unilateral airspace closure, a high-stakes political bomb. As we covered in our dossier shorts, the air ban is widely considered a violation of the Chicago Convention and international law. The timing is paramount. The action was uncoordinated with the Pentagon. Confirming its primary utility was political shock and media saturation, a textbook distraction from the record low approval ratings and the damaging Epstein File revelations. The U.S. essentially prioritized its domestic political needs over international law. But Venezuela has proven it can strike back, not with missiles, but with devastating diplomatic and political efficacy. The ICAO showdown. Venezuela immediately filed a formal complaint with the ICAO, with the UN and allies like China and Cuba condemning the U.S., warning it risks shattering global sovereignty. China, specifically, has used the crisis to warn that U.S. actions endanger global air travel security. The Migrant Human Shield. In a tactical masterpiece, Caracas suspended all migrant repatriation flights from the U.S. These were flights chartered by ICE to deport Venezuelan nationals. By stopping them, Venezuela instantly turned the foreign policy crisis into a domestic political failure, trapping thousands of deportees in a dangerous limbo and putting severe pressure on U.S. detention facilities. This move effectively weaponized a humanitarian crisis to achieve diplomatic leverage. The lesson here is profound. When a superpower resorts to extreme unilateral actions, its rivals are provided with all the moral and legal justification they need to retaliate, and the cost falls on the U.S.'s own domestic agenda. Ultimately, the crisis in Venezuela has moved beyond the debate over Maduro's legitimacy. It is now a test case for global stability. The U.S. is prioritizing maximum pressure, including the use of military coercion, to achieve regime change. The danger is that this unilateral action, flouting international aviation law under the pretext of narcoterrorism, sets a catastrophic precedent. If the U.S. can arbitrarily close the airspace of a sovereign nation, what stops Russia from doing the same in the Black Sea, or China from doing the same in the South China Sea? By sacrificing international law for short-term political gain, Washington risks giving its rivals the exact legal and moral cover they need to commit acts of aggression elsewhere. The Venezuela Crisis Dossier will continue to track the consequences. This has been Rufus Brown, and I'll see you for the next intellectual deep dive.